Let's peek behind the curtain and learn more about this amazing tool. In this module, we start with an overview and discover the purpose and basic features of the Angular CLI. We then build an application using the CLI and examine the many configuration and startup files it creates. We dig into how it serves up our application, learn more about its code generation features, take a brief look at running tests, and prepare the resulting application for deployment. Let's get started. The Angular CLI is a command line interface for Angular. Its primary purpose is to assist Angular developers with building an Angular application, generating Angular files, building and serving the resulting application, running tests, and building the application in preparation for deployment. The Angular CLI commands are accessed using ng for Angular, the command name, command arguments, and options prefixed with --. For example, ng new hello-world -- prefix hw. As we saw earlier in this course, we often have the Angular CLI installed twice. We install it globally, so we have access to the ng commands from any folder. As new versions of Angular are released, we can update this globally installed Angular CLI. That way, as we create new applications with ng new, we use the latest Angular version. Angular automatically installs the Angular CLI locally in each Angular project. That way, the local version of the Angular CLI matches the version of the Angular project over time. We installed the Angular CLI globally earlier in this course. If you have not yet installed the CLI globally, do it now by opening a command window and typing npm install -g for global at angular/CLI. Once you have it installed, we'll use it throughout this module. Let's jump into a demo. I've already installed the CLI. How can we find out what the CLI can do? One option is to use the ng help feature. Look at all those commands. Use the help command anytime you want to see the list of available commands, or if you need assistance with the arguments and options for a specific command. One of my favorites is update. Using the update command, we can automatically update an Angular application to another version of Angular. It's a great way to keep your projects updated to the latest Angular version. See this link for more information. Let's try out the version command. Type ng in the command. We'll use the v alias, and we see a nice text output, including our Angular CLI version. When you watch this course, you may have a newer version. Now let's walk through how to use some of the key commands of the Angular CLI, starting with ng new. We create a new Angular application using the Angular CLI new command. We used this command earlier in this course, but now let's take a closer look at all the files that it generates. Here in the command window, navigate to a folder for the new project folder. We'll type ng new and our new application name. Let's use a classic, hello-world, and let's specify a selector prefix of hw for hello world. The CLI has the ability to provide prompts to ask for more information. The CLI may add or change prompts, so your experience may vary from what you see here. It's asking whether we want to add Angular routing to the application. To keep things simple for our demo, let's answer no. Next, it asks which style sheet format we want. We'll select CSS and press Enter to select. After we answer the last question, the CLI generates our application. Now the CLI is automatically installing the packages defined in that package.json file. This takes a bit of time, so I'll jump ahead. When the CLI new command is finished, we see a success message. Yay! The CLI creates a folder with the same name as the application name. Let's navigate down to the created hello-world folder. I'll then use the shortcut code. To open this folder in VS Code. Starting at the top, the Node Modules folder contains all of the libraries that were just installed by the CLI, as defined in the package.json file. The SRC folder contains the source code for our application. Below it is the app folder, where we'll add all of the modules, components, services, and other files for our application. The assets folder is for any images or assets we want to include with the application. In our APM project, our welcome page logo and product images are in this folder. The environments folder sets up our build environments. By default, it generates two, one for development and one for production. The CLI picks the appropriate environment file based on the flags we use. The CLI comes with a default fave icon. Nice. The index.html file is the first file downloaded when a user accesses our application. There isn't much here. You'd think that there would be at least a few script tags. But no, we'll see why a little later. In most cases, you won't need to ever modify this file. Notice that the Angular CLI uses the prefix we defined as the prefix for the directive here. Main.ts is the file that bootstraps our application. This is another file you should never need to modify. The polyfills file aids in supporting both evergreen and classic browsers. Polyfills add code to allow functionality written for modern browsers to work in older browsers. By default, it is set up to support evergreen browsers as stated here. If you need to target older browsers, there are comments in this file defining which additional libraries you need. Here is a style sheet for application-wide styles. As its name suggests, the test file sets up for testing. That's it for the source folder. The browser list RC file defines the list of browsers and browser versions that your application will support. It's used by the build system to build bundles appropriate for your supported browsers. The editor config file provides some standard settings for your editor. The get-ignore tells Git which files to ignore for checking into Git. Notice that our large Node Modules folder is included in this list. The Angular.json file is the CLI configuration file for our local install of the Angular CLI. This file is used to configure how the CLI generates code and works with our files. Throughout this course, we use stricter type checking in our sample application. This required that we specify data types, unless they could be inferred, and to assign a default value to every property and variable. The Karma config file sets up Karma, which is a JavaScript test runner. We'll use that for our unit tests. We walked through the package.json file in the First Things First module earlier in this course. Here's a basic README. The tsconfig files are for TypeScript configuration. So that's an overview of the basic files created by the CLI new command. The next thing we want to do is run our application, so let's check out the serve command. Once we have a generated application, the first thing we may want to do is run it. We do that with the ngserve command. The ngserve command compiles the application, turning our templates and TypeScript code into JavaScript. It generates application bundles from that JavaScript. It starts a local web server that listens on port 4200. It serves the application from memory and rebuilds when we change any files. Let's see the command in action. We are back in the Hello World application. Here in the terminal window, we'll type ngserve. Since this is the first time we are using the Angular CLI for this project, it asks if we want to share anonymous usage data. I'll say yes. The application is then built, and we can see that it compiled successfully. The CLI launches a development server and listens on port 4200. The compiler is now in watch mode, so it watches for any changes and automatically recompiles for us. So, where is it? Where is our application? Click this link to open the application in your default browser. And here is the application. It has a slick welcome page with links to the Tour of Heroes tutorial, the CLI documentation, and the Angular team's blog. In the package.json file that I included with the starter files for the APM sample application, I added -o to the start script. The -o is an alias for the --open flag, which opens the default browser. Let's stop execution and restart with the -o flag. We type ngserve-o, which automatically opens our default browser and navigates to our application. But we can go into our package.json and update it here if we'd like. Before we move on, let's take a moment and look more closely at the output of the ngserve process. When we use the ngserve command, the CLI builds the application and outputs it as a set of bundled JavaScript and map files. Here we see the list of bundles. Vendor.js contains the Angular and third-party libraries imported into our application. Polyfills.js contains the polyfills declared in the polyfills.ts file. Recall that this file contains the code needed to support a variety of browsers and browser features. These style files are our styles. Main.js contains our application code. And runtime.js is the Webpack loader. Webpack is the technology behind the compilation and bundling process. These files are generated in memory and are not available to find on disk. We'll generate actual files we can look at when we use the ngbuild command shortly. Going back to the browser, let's open the Developer Tools and view the Sources tab. We see those same bundles here on the left. And notice our index.html file. The CLI injected the needed script tags for us to pull down all of these bundles. Another mystery solved. Peeking inside the main bundle, we see something that looks a bit like our code transpiled to JavaScript. Unless we specify otherwise, all of our application code will be compiled into this bundle. Since the CLI also generated the associated map files, we can see down here in the Webpack node that we have our actual TypeScript code. This makes it much easier to debug our code as we saw earlier in this course. Close the browser and use Ctrl-C to stop the development server. Now that we have an application and can run it, we'll want to add to it. Let's check out the generate command next. Our new little application is cool and all, but it doesn't do much. We need to add components and templates and services and modules. We do that with the generate command. We've already seen this command in action, but it can do so much more. The Angular CLI generate command uses something called schematics to generate the requested code. According to the Angular documentation, a schematic is a template-based code generator that supports complex logic. It's a set of instructions for transforming a software project by generating or modifying code. You can think of a schematic like a blueprint. Angular defines blueprints for generating specific kinds of code. Using the ngGenerate command leverages schematics for code generation. We can create components with templates and style sheet files, as we did with the product detail component earlier in this course. We can generate our own custom directives or route guards, as we did with our product detail guard. We can create interfaces and modules. We can create pipes and services, all with only typing a few characters. Neat! Let's generate some code. Back in our Hello World application, let's generate a component. Type ng, g, c, and our component name, let's say welcome. The output indicates that it created a style sheet file, template HTML file, unit testing file, and TypeScript file for our component. And it updated the app module to add the new component to its declarations array. By default, it created a welcome folder and added these files to it. Next, we generate a service to manage our users. Type ng, g, s, user. The output shows that it created the service and a unit test specification file for us. Now that we have more code, let's see how to run tests. Testing our Angular code is always important, but often neglected due to the additional time and effort required to set up and execute the tests. The CLI makes it a bit easier by generating the testing spec and configuration files for us. We can run these tests using ng-test to test each piece or unit of our code. To run our unit tests, in the terminal window, type ng-test. This builds the application, launches the browser, and executes the Karma test runner. From here, we can see the results of our unit tests. Angular generated several tests for us, and they've all passed, so we are all green. The test runner runs in watch mode, so we can modify our files, and the tests will immediately rerun. I'll close the browser, and notice that it tried to bring it up again. I first need to terminate the test runner with Ctrl-C. Then I'll clear the screen with CLS. Testing is a big topic that is beyond the scope of this course. See the Pluralsight library for more information about testing. Now that we have our application built and tested, we are ready to deploy. An application is not very useful unless you can deploy it to your users. The build command helps you prepare your application for deployment. Let's take a look. When we deploy to production, there are a few more things that we want to achieve. We want our bundles to be as small as possible. This means that we want to minify or uglify the code and perform something called tree shaking. Tree shaking shakes up our code to drop out any dead branches, which basically means that it removes any unused pieces. The CLI will do all of these things for us. Here in the terminal window, we'll type ng-build. When the build is complete, we see the list of generated bundles. Notice that they now have a hash as part of the file name. This is done for cache busting. Every time we update something in our code, it needs to be redeployed to the server. We expect the new version of the files to be downloaded by the browser when a user accesses our application. But for performance reasons, the browser may have cached those files. By changing the file names using a hash, the browser will download the latest version because the file names won't match its cached versions. When the ng-build process is complete, we have a dist folder here in our project. If we open this folder, we see our actual bundles. Notice also that there are no map files here. By default, the build command does not generate map files, but there is a flag for that if you need them. Peeking into the main bundle, all the code is on one line, and look at those variable names. It's been minified. Glad we don't have to debug using that code. And here is the resulting index.html file with the script tags to pull in each bundle. We can then deploy these files to a server somewhere. Wow, the CLI is powerful. Now let's finish up this module with some checklists we can use as we leverage the Angular CLI. Here are the key CLI commands for reference. Use ng-help or ng, a command name, --help to view the CLI documentation. The remaining commands here help you create, execute, build, test, and deploy your Angular application, and keep them updated to the current Angular version. You may find yourself using ng-generate a lot. Refer to this checklist as you generate the code files for your application. There are more commands and many more flags than what we discussed in this module. To learn more about the Angular CLI, check out John Papa's course, aptly entitled Angular CLI in the Pluralsight library. It covers many more of its amazing features. Up next, let's finish our journey with some final words.